So this video is going to try and connect some dots on spelling chords and then talking about chord function, or when we say this is a 1 chord or a 2 chord or a 3 chord, what that means and how that's actually not just a burden of more information, but actually something that can help you. So in studying how to learn to spell your chords and recognize chords, there's maybe a few steps. Let's presume that you can read your notes already, okay? Then you should have learned how to construct basic triads, like a C triad has a C, an E, and a G, and a D triad has a D, an F, and an A. E triads have E, G, and B. F triads have, these are the notes in them, right? G triads are G, B, D, and A triads are A, C, E, and then B triads are B, D, F. Okay? So that was the first step. And then the next step is to recognize, first off, also that this is the root of the chord, the name, the middle note's called the third, and the top note's called the fifth. I'm not going to get into why now. There's some videos that I'll link at the end of this that can take you through this if you're unfamiliar with this. But then the next step was to recognize that the distance between the notes is different depending on what kind of chord it is. Like if you count C, E, G, and you count the number of piano keys from here to here, it's 4, and from here to here is 3. But if we took this A chord right here and we went A, C, E, you'd find that there's only 3 piano keys between there and 4 between there, and I mean both black and white keys. So if I'm on a C chord and I go from C to E, I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then to G, 1, 2, 3. Sounds like that. But if I have an A chord, sounds a little different, not just lower, but different, because between A to C, there's my first note, 1, 2, 3, and then we already know C to E from looking at this chord is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? B is even funnier because between B, D, and F, it's 3 plus 3. There's my B, there's my D, right? And D to E, sorry, D to F, 3 and 3. They all have different qualities of sound, right? And we call the 4 plus 3s major chords, or major triads, and the 3 plus 4s we call minor, and the 3 plus 3s we call diminished. And there is a 4 plus 4 synthetically made. It doesn't happen naturally without sharps and flats, and that's called augmented, but we won't worry about that right now. So that's a concept. And again, there's a video going into more detail on each one of these topics that I'll link below. Okay. And then from here, we learn how to change them. Like for instance, if I wanted a C minor triad, then I would go C, E, G, and I'd know that this is 4 plus 3. But what I want is a C, E, G, where it's 3 plus 4, because that's what minor is. In other words, I don't want it to sound like this, 4 plus 3, I want it to sound like this, okay? And what we do is, if we put a flat which lowers the note down, then it pushes the note in this direction, that's what we want. If I lower this note, it pushes it in this direction, which makes this be 3, opening up that, which makes it 4. So sometimes you hear things like, to change a major triad, C, E, G, into a minor triad, you lower the third, right? And if we wanted to change this into a diminished triad, you'd lower, now it's 3 plus 4, sorry. You want to make this be 3 plus 3, and since this is currently 3 plus 4, we take and lower the top one right there. And we can go in the other direction. If I wanted to have an A major triad, I'd start going A, C, E, and we know that this is 3 plus 4 because we measured it, right? Or we have it memorized, and to make it be 4 plus 3, we would sharp or raise the middle note, changing that to 4 and squishing this to 3. See how that works, right? So it would be from here to, okay? And we can even go one step further and just sort of pre-memorize which ones are which ones. F chords, C chords, and G chords are all 4 plus 3 if they don't have any sharps or flats on them, which equal major triads, right? And D, E, and A chords right? Not the notes, but like, D, F, A, and E, G, B, and all that are 3 plus 4, which equal minor triads. And B on its own is the only one that is 3 plus 3, which is diminished. Okay, so these are steps you need to go through. And then when you look at the music here, so we were analyzing this in an earlier video, I would go like this. I'd say, well, I can read my notes. That's a G, and that's a B flat because of the key signature, and a D, and a G right there. And so you can spin it around. There's another video practicing that, saying, is it a D chord, DFA? No, it doesn't match. Is it a B chord, BDF? Close, but not quite. Is it a G chord, GBD? Yes, it is. And so then you go, well, G, B, D. And you'd say, well, what is that normally? And you go, well, G is one of the 4 plus 3s normally, right? So it's 4 plus 3 as it is. But wait, there's a B flat. The B flat lowers this, so it becomes 3, and that becomes 4. So this is not G major, but G minor, okay? And that's what we do. All those steps have to be done well, and reading notes have to be done well so that you can identify what the chord is. But then we start writing this thing called 1 chords and 2 chords and 5 chords and things like that. And I'm going to explain what that is, make a case for why you want to know that material, and then why it's actually good. It's helpful for figuring out stuff here, okay? They all help each other. So I'm just gonna start with the C scale, C major scale. It's one that most everybody knows, okay? And that would be a C and a D and an E and an F and a G and an A and a B, and then C's up at the top again, okay? And you're probably familiar with the sound. Some of you may already know all this and you're just looking at this as curiosity. Hopefully this is useful for helping it be a good tip for you as well to tie everything together. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C again, right? If you're studying scales, you know there's a half step there and a half step there, and this is what we call a major scale. And it's related to the idea of a major chord, but it's not the same thing, and I apologize on behalf of music history, who decided to call a bunch of things the same thing, okay, music history wasn't canonized, music theory wasn't canonized in one place, in one way. It developed sort of organically, some people teaching other people things, some people figuring out the same stuff at the same time, and so on. But we call the first note in the scale 1, and 2, and 3. This makes sense, yes? Hopefully. Okay, and this is not 8, this is 1 again, right? Okay, a chord whose root, beginning note in the C scale is C, is called the 1 chord because it starts on number 1. And the 5 chord would be the G chord, because the 5 is like in scale degrees, that's the 5th scale degree. Now, if I had a different scale, I'm going to make D major. And you're just going to have to, if you don't know your D major scale, well, you're going to need to learn them. Scales are super important. But I'm going to write this here, and just trust me, if you don't know your scales, that's fine. But that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again. The reason these sharps are there is because it adjusts the different distances of the notes so that, remember we said there's a half step here and a half step there, so that now the half steps are still between notes 3 and 4 and 7 and 1 again. It sounds higher or lower, but because the distance between the notes are all the same, it sounds like a major scale, and this is a D major scale, right? So that's what we mean when we say numbers. So in the key of G minor, using a G minor scale, and don't worry if you don't know what that all is, but the first chord starts on G and it happens to be minor, okay? This was an A chord, that would be a 2 chord, and it happens to be diminished in the minor key. That's down the road though. Let's just focus on major keys for a second. If I were to spell all the chords using just the C scale, we're going to get this configuration that we had at the beginning with no sharps and flats, right? So that means if I spell only these chords using only the C scale, because I'm in the C scale, and when we say we're using the C scale, that means we're in the key of C, in this case C major scale, so in the key of C major, then this would be a C, E, G chord. This would be a D, F, A chord. This would be an E, G, B chord. This would be an F, A, C. And spelling the names of the notes. My F chord, my G chord would be G, B, D, A, C, E, B, D, F, and so on, right? And you can go up even one more. Sometimes the 5 chord often has like another note, root, 3rd, 5th, and then the 7th would be that. That's the most common place we'll find it. Okay, but we can make an observation on this. If we're in a major key, meaning using a major scale for our song or piece of music, then the 1 chord is C and the 2 chords D, etc., etc. But the 1 chord and the 4 chord are, and the 5 chord, for that matter, are all major chords, right? And I'm going to use a different color. The 2 chord, D and E, and the 6 chord, so 2, 3, and 6, right, are minor chords. We learned this. This is the key with no sharps and flats, and we have gone through these steps and learned this. And then my 7 chord on its own is a diminished chord. Now, you might go like, oh no, more information to learn, but it's actually very good because since we add sharps and flats to all the other scales, it's 15 major scales, right? That means 15 major keys. Then if we learn that, and we put them there to make sure that the distance between all these notes is the same, then if the 1 chord in C major is C, E, G major, it's a major chord, let's just check out the D chord here. And I'm going to use the same thing. I'm going to use this scale to spell this thing. So my 1 chord is D, F sharp because it's in the scale, and A. That's my 1 chord, okay? But let's take a look at this for a minute. Let's compare. D, F, A, just on its own, would have been a minor, right? It would have been 3 plus 4, minor. But because the F sharp's in the scale, to make this feel like a major scale, it's going to be an F sharp, which pushes this in this direction, making that 4 and that 3. It is a D major chord, right? In other words, in major scales, major keys, that's what we mean, we're using the major scale, the chord built on the first scale degree is always going to be major. The 2 chord or 2nd degree is always going to be minor. 3 chord's going to be minor. 4 chord's going to be major. 5 chord's going to be major. And if we add the 7th, it's a different quality. We call it dominant. And then 6 chord, doesn't matter what it starts on. When you get there and figure out the notes, it's going to be minor. And then the 7 chord's always going to be diminished. Okay? So that's really useful because if I see a piece of music in a certain scale, if I can figure out what number it is on the scale degrees, right, given the major scale that we're using, then if I have this memorized, I don't even have to check the notes anymore. If there are no sharps or flats that are accidentals, like altering the scale, altering the notes in there, it's going to be these qualities, okay? And that can be really useful because it can help you get the numbers and know what qualities they are, but it can also reassure you of spellings of chords too, right? Works both directions, all right? Let's take a look at how that might look in real music. So this is a hymn from a church hymnal, and it was composed by Meyerbeer, and then the different people put their own words on it. This is not the original one from my hymn book. That's down here in the key of D, but I've transposed it or changed it to the key of C using the C scale, so everything's come down one step because D is here and C is there, so I brought it all down. No sharps and flats. So let's start off with, let's just take a look at this right here. I know I'm using the, blue pen right here, yes. I'm using the C scale, C major scale, no sharps and flats, okay? And I look here at my notes and I go C, E, bass clef, and C, G. C, E, G, no sharps and flats. Now I can learn that my C major scale is, or sorry, C major chord is C, E, G, and I can just write that there. Or I can say this is the 1 chord, and I know my 1 chords are major, so it's going to be major. Now, when we do full-on analysis, we use Roman numerals and we make them uppercase and lowercase and stuff like that. I'm just going to use numbers for right now. But this is going to let me know that I'm in the key of C major, uppercase C with a colon, and I'm going to put a 1 right here. Later, we can talk about why we use Roman numerals and stuff like that, but that's a 1, okay? And then here as well, C, G, C, E, right? C, C, E, G is still a 1. So the melody is changing and the internal lines are changing, but the chord stays the same, okay? That's good. Now, there's one other piece of this that we want to bring in here. So we're thinking about the qualities of the chords on each scale degree and giving them their number, but also remembering what they are, okay? But we also know there are certain patterns or conventions. Like for instance, if I have a 5 chord, like this one right here, it really likes to go to 1. Okay, these are called chord progression rules or principles. If I have a phrase that starts here and goes to there, generally speaking, these two places are going to be a 1 chord or a 5 chord and a 1 chord or a 5 chord. This isn't like a hard, fast rule, but it's generally true that we like to frame up our phrases with 1s and 5 chords. So if we know these kind of things, chord progression rules, cadence rules, these kind of things. If you have a 2 chord, it likes to go to 5, right? If you have a 6, 4, or a 2 chord, they can go downward to each other, but eventually they also all like to go to 5, right? Those kind of things. And there's some exceptional and other cool rules about this, but this is a clue. For instance, here, let's come back here for a minute. This is my phrase. I'm going to play this for you real quickly if I can sort of not look. I got to look away over to the keyboard, kind of. So there's the first one, and then, right? And then third measure, and then dun, and then here. Okay, that's the end of the first phrase. I'm sorry about the playing. This is over here and the piano's way over there, so I'm twisted and don't even know, like, I'm just sort of feeling for keys. Okay, so we know that the beginnings and the ends of the phrases like to be 1 chords and 5 chords, and eventually you have this memorized, but let's just write this out for a minute. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C again. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That means that at the end here, we're looking for either a C chord or a G chord, probably. There are some exceptions, but most of the time that's the case. Check this out. G, B, D. And that's a 5 chord. So then we're going to write 5 there. Again, later Roman numerals. Okay? Another thing that's nice to know, and this is not scale specific or chord progression specific, but lower notes in a piano score or a choir score or something like that tend to be more foundational to the sound of the chords. And what I mean by that is that they tend to stabilize your harmony. They almost more than likely are part of the chord, whereas above in the melody, you might have things that are not part of the chord. So if it comes to a tie, you have to sort of say, like, which is it, right? So for instance, down here, you see these C's going along here. It's not a guarantee, but especially in a simpler piece like this, I'm going to bet those are C chords, and I'm going to go in with the expectation that these notes above will make C, E, Gs, right? Now, if they're not, at least I had that as an expectation that I can check against. And then if not, I say, well, what other chords have C in them from here? Well, the F chord, F, A, C, right? And the A chord, A, C, E, also have C in them, so it could be those, but I'm going to guess to begin with that it's a C chord. It's my home chord. It's the most important chord. 5 chords, the next most important chord. They frame up our music, okay? So let's take a look at this. I suspect C, E, G, C, C, E, G. It's another 1 chord, right? Okay? And then here, well, I can go and check this out, or I can say, like, hey, that is the same. Right? Like, you're allowed to cheat and look sideways. You don't have to count everything out and look everything out. And so this whole first thing is just a C chord, which means if I had an ukulele or something, I'd just strum like this. And I'd be like, bum, 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 right? Okay. Or if in the piano it changes, right? Okay, but it's all there. Okay. So this looks different. This looks different. I've got an F and an A, right? Now, if I have my chords memorized really well, then I know that that could be an FAC chord, right? Could be FAC, but could also be DFA, right? Now, my knowledge of chord patterns, okay, of what chord likes to go to what chord and what chords make phrases and things, that's going to help me make a guess here, but I'm still going to check out the notes. Also, I know that this is a 4 chord in the, oh, I shouldn't use those numbers, 4 chord in the scale, and this is a 2 chord, and both of those are perfectly acceptable before a 5, and that's a chord progression rule that I know. So let's check this out for a minute. F, A, E, G. F, A, E, G. It's none of those. It's not a DFA and it's not an FAC. They're not there. Okay, so what we have here are probably notes that are not part of the chord. You can do that. They add tension and then release when they go to the chord tone. They connect and make lines smooth so they're not always just jumping up and down, right? So this is like from here, but it's not matching up with this. And this goes to like the bass lines. The lower lines tend to be the ones that we hear whether we're in tune against and whether the harmony works against it or not. So here, FA, and these don't work. And so I'm thinking, are these not part of the chord? Is this part of the chord? Usually one of these is going to match. And do you see how there's an F there? That matches with that. This is going to be dissonant or tense and then relax into this, which matches. This is going to be an E, which is very tense against this note here, the F, because they're a half step apart. Let me play those for you. That's not good, but then when it comes down to there, it's much nicer. Same thing for the G, and then down to the F. So again, our knowledge, first off, that this is probably going to be a DFA or an FAC helps us figure out which one of these work, plus our ears, right? And what we find is that this is an FADF. We spin it around, it's not FAC, it's not ACE, it's DFA, and that's my 2 chord. And again, my knowledge of chord progressions tell me that 2 chords are perfectly fine to follow 1 and to set myself up for a 5 chord, okay? Let's check over here. I still have the FA, but now I have a C and an A, so it's not the same as this anymore. So I have an F, A, and a C, A, and your knowledge of chords says it's an FAC. It's not an ACE or a CEG, right? And its position leading us into the 5 chord makes sense if it's a 4 chord. And I can also go, well, you know, it's 4 in the scale because I have that part memorized. The next thing is, if you want to write lead sheets here, like lead sheet chords, like stuff you'd see on sheet music, you'd say this is a C. And honestly, we don't usually put a large M or A major for a triad. If it's a major triad, we just leave it as a C uppercase, and then we modify the other ones. But I'm going to write this in just for us to remember. This is C major. This is C major. Okay. Now, this doesn't count, but what's this? And if we remember, and this goes back to our scales, 2 chords are minor in major scales, in major keys. Remember, we did that pre-work here. We have that all figured out. And so I could figure out DFA, and I could count 3 half steps and then 4 half steps, then go back and say it's minor. Or I could say, this is just D minor, because I know that it's a 2 chord, and 2 chords are minor. So your knowledge of where it is in the key helps you when you memorize this information. Now, there could be alterations, accidentals, that can change that. But if there aren't any, if it's purely in the scale, then it'll work, okay? Here, I have a FAC, which is my 4 chord. And if you remember, 4 chords are major. So I'd be like, this is an F major chord. And then this is a 5 chord. And we also learned that 5 chords are major. So, oops, G major, okay? Guess I could do that uppercase as well, okay? Cool? Let's go on to the next line. And I'm going to kind of run us through this quickly. Okay? So I'm just going to tell you right now that this is that one time where I said sometimes they get an extra note on top on the 5 chord. That's the most common place for it. And so it said G, B, D, F. That's what happened here. See, I have the same G, B, D here as I have here. It's a G chord. This F is that extra one. This is starting to become intermediate to advanced thing, where you have to learn to recognize that since G is the 5 chord, it could also have, we'll put a little higher upper script 7 right there. When we use Roman numerals, it's not confusing. Okay, that's one of the reasons why we use them. But 5 with a 7th on top, right? And that would be G7, okay? All right, we know that 5 likes to go to 1. That's a rule that we learn from our chord progression rules. We're bringing these things in: knowledge of scales, quality of chords, spelling of chords, and knowledge of phrases, like in chord progressions, how phrases set up, what chord likes to go to what. And so we're expecting then this to go to a 1 chord after the 5, and that would be C. So let's go looking for that. E, G, so far so good. C, E, C, E, G, good. It's a 1 chord, right? And we know that 1 chords are major, so we're just going to presume it's C major, like that. You can count it out if you want, or you can memorize that that's a major chord, but 1 chords are major. All right, let's check this one out here. This is tricky. It's got a B and a G and a D and an F. And again, I apologize because this is a chord with more than just 3 notes. You could see that there's a BDF in there and think it's a BDF7 chord, but there's also a G in there. And so this is the one where we have to go, oh yeah, G is the 5 chord, right? And sometimes the 5 have an extra note, the 7th on top right there. So this is a 5, it's a G chord with a 7th on top, and we'll go G7 right there. Okay, and 5 chords like to go to 1 chord. So let's check this out. Is this a C chord? C, C, E, G. It is. It's a 1 chord, and that's C major. And let's check it out. As we come to the cadence, let's figure out our cadence at the end. This was the 5 chord. Started with the 5 chord at the beginning of the next phrase. Does it end on 5 or 1? Let's check it out. Is this a C chord or a G chord? Again, we have expectations because we know that there are these rules. There's a hierarchy. And since it's the end of this, and it goes like... right? Now, if your ears are good, you'll hear that that's this chord, which is the 1 chord. C, C, E, G. You can also see that it's the same as other places where we've had this same voicing right there. I know the rhythms are different, but, right? 1. And we know the thing that likes to precede 1 is 5. Let's check out and see if this is 5. G, G, B, D. It is 5. So this is C major. And this is G major, right? And this is the same right there. G major, right there. Okay. Now, what about that right there? G, A, C is not a chord. It's not GBD, it's not ACE, it's not CEG, it's missing something. And what this is we'll go back to the idea that the lower notes stabilize the sounds of the chords for us more often than not. And this is G chord all the way through here. These are just like bended in and bended out, right? So when you hear this, I'm gonna play the last line. So right here we have this, and then here's my, and then we're here now, right? And then my 1 chord, and now we're coming to here. We land on a nice 5 chord, push down, and then push back up, right? So they're non-chord tones that are there for flavor and color and to give the melody its character and things like that. But we don't get confused when it doesn't make up for a chord because we know what the chord that's framing it is, right? And these hold out that sound, and this says, I'm pushing against it. Okay, no, I give up, I go back, right? Okay, cool. If you're still watching, I want to try one more thing. Here it is again in the original key of D, meaning using a D scale. I know it's a D scale because I can spell my D scale. My D scale is D, E, F sharp. G, A, B, and C sharp. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay. Now, this is actually the same music exactly as the one up top, but it has been transposed or transported into the key of D. So it'll sound the same, but it's just higher, because D is higher than the key of C. Right? Hear that dissonance? Oops. There we go. And there. And then there. Second line right here. We have this. Again, I apologize. I'm looking sideways and twisting and reaching way behind me to get the piano. And then, right? Okay, good. So, well, we can copy. This is in the key of D. This is a 1 chord, and a 1 chord, and a 1 chord, and a 1 chord, and a 2 chord, and these are not part of it. Right, because it's this right here, and then this is a 4 chord, and this is a 5 chord, and this was a 5 chord with a 7th, okay, and this was a 1 chord, and this was a 5 chord with a 7th, okay, and this is a 1 chord, and this is a 5 chord, and this was not part of it, and that's a 5 chord, and that's a 1 chord, okay. Now, what's cool about this is because I know my D scale, and I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I know the quality of the chords, I could do this. I could go, well, this is D, and this is F sharp because of the key signature, and D and A, right? And I can go, well, D, F, A is minor, but then D, F sharp, A is major, and so I can go, this is D major. Or I could say this, D is my 1 chord and 1 chords are major, D major, okay? Also D major there. This is a D chord. No sharps or flats are deviant from the original scale. And remember, these are there purposefully to put all these notes in place correctly. This is another D major chord through this measure. And here, this is a 2 chord. My 2 chord is E, and 2 chords are minor. This is in the major scale. So this is an E minor chord. You could go and spell it, E, G, B, count them and all that. Or you could just say it's on E, that's a 2 chord. It's minor because 2 chords are minor, okay? And this is my 4 chord. 4 chord is 1, 2, 3, 4 is G. And it's major because 4 chords are major. And if you spell it out, you'll find it's G, B, D. My 5 chord is A. And that's my 5 chord right there. And 5 chords are also major triads. Okay? You can check that out because A, C, E is minor. And then if you raise the C to C sharp because it's in the key signature or in the scale, it becomes major. Or you could just say 5 chords are major. Boom. Right? All right. This is my 5 with a 7th, so it's an A with a 7. This is my 1 chord again. It's D major. Okay, this is my 5 chord again with a 7th, and this is my 1 chord again, which is D major. This is my 5 chord, so it's A major. Those are non-chord tones, another A major right there, and then a 1 chord again, and that's a D major chord. And as musicians, we love to think of chords as numbers because they have so much information packed into them. Also, we learn chord progression patterns. So 1 can go to this, can go to that, can go to this, and eventually things terminate in a 5 or a 1, unless they have certain special instances where we're breaking those rules. Okay? So let's review. You should learn how to spell your chords, which is basic notes, qualities, right? And then how to modify them to make them different qualities, right? I'll put links in the video. Again, sorry, you'll see that in the part underneath of the videos you should watch for that. And then you should learn your scales. And just start with your major scales. Start with some that you know, right? And then you want to bring these things two together and say, what are my chord qualities? And that just refers to what number in the scale is the chord given a certain scale that you're in or key that you're in. That's what they mean. And then, so the number of the scale, right? And the quality of the chord on that number, right? And then the final piece is you want to be able to say, like, what patterns are used in music. We call them chord progressions, cadences, formulas, those kind of things. And once you start to know that, then there's some other tricks, like look at the bass notes, because they help you figure that out, right? And then we can also learn like Roman numerals, Roman numbers. Those are the, you know, and we can learn things called figured bass, but this is down the line. There's no point in learning this if these things aren't solid, right? Or at least they're not on their way to being solid, because these are the things, and you know, read notes. But once you get that down, this is, you know, this is doable in a couple weeks or a month or something like that. It just depends on how much you study. Once you get that down, then this starts to be a lot easier and a lot more fun. And obviously some pieces are more difficult than others because the texture with non-chord tones or the way it goes loopy into different keys and stuff like that, rather than staying sort of tonally solid in the same area. And then, you know, you'd have to learn minor scales and all that stuff again if you wanted to do keys that are in, or pieces that are in minor keys, right? But this is the foundation. Read your notes, spell your chords, spell some scales, learn how they interact together, and then you can look for patterns and then tips and tricks that you do, okay? All right, I'll put links to this. I'm sure in the days to come, I'll probably put together some of the videos. I have some videos that aggregate teach you how to do this, and so I'll put those up eventually. You can see that as well. But there is like there's like a playlist of these things, right? Which this is going to go in as well. And then maybe we'll talk about that at some time too. These are all in things that we teach at college, and for music majors and non-music majors. So I'll try to aggregate and put together some of the videos for the different courses and put them in playlists so you can see what that might be like if you wanted to study. Also, I'll start adding other videos, like you may have seen that I did one where I just practice along with you. I might do a, hey, let's practice modifying these things and remember, you know, like there's things that explain it, but maybe I'll just put a practice along video for that. Same kind of thing for here. Maybe we'll start doing occasional, very short analyses of not Bach chorales, but small hymns and things like that, or small pieces or pieces of them that present themselves well. Yeah, okay.